So Pillbush has been in the game for a couple of weeks now. Apologies for the very slow start of the season in terms of content here on the channel, but I am finally back into the swing of things now after my time off. And so today, now that I've had proper hands-on time with her for a few weeks, we're going to be going over some of the best tips and tricks you can use to dominate the arena as Pillbush in Star Wars Hunters. Now, these are more just like basic tips. Starting in Season 4, I'm actually going to be putting out some comprehensive hunter guides with not only the best tips, but also all the stats you need to know. And those are going to be really in depth compared to this one being just a little bit more basic. So keep that in mind and be sure to keep your eyes peeled for those in Season 4 of Star Wars Hunters. Now, the first thing to take note of when it comes to Pillbush is that she is the queen of assists in this game. I don't think I've ever played a hunter who I've gotten so many assists with. Even when I'm having games with fairly high kills, I'm still getting anywhere from 10 to 15 assists per game. And that is almost purely because of her grenades and the fact that you can spam them, as well as those Wisties, which also deal a little bit of damage, but also slow enemies down quite a bit. And realistically, she's just very good at not only dealing damage herself, but also just kind of putting enemies in positions where your teammates can kind of take advantage of them too. I've found that when playing Pillbush, you pretty much just want to spam the grenades non-stop. Even if you're not directly involved in a fight, maybe in the distance you can see, a teammate and an enemy fighting, just spam those grenades up there. The worst thing that's going to happen is they're not going to hit, and it doesn't really matter. She's got a very, very quick reload on those grenades, and so pretty much at all times you just want to be spamming grenades, unless obviously there is no one in your line of sight. And hell, even then, if you're within range of dropping some of those grenades on an objective or something like that over the top of some cover, then even in that situation it is still worth just spamming those grenades. Now, something else that she does very well is that she's very mobile and sort of agile, especially on maps with any sort of verticality. On maps, for example, like Dune Sea Outpost, where there's those sort of upper levels to that middle section of the map, and especially when it comes to the new Hoth Frontlines map, which is probably the most vertical map in the game so far, she does really well just due to the ability to jump really high. And in a lot of situations, especially when there's no other way for enemies to get up onto those ledges, that can actually save you from an almost certain death, because once you're up there, not only are you going to be safe from a lot of different enemies, but you can also still shoot grenades down over the legend, especially the Wisties too, and it can sort of turn the tide of any battle pretty quickly by just making the most of that verticality. So do not forget that. She's probably the single best hunter in the game when it comes to kind of taking advantage of that verticality. Now, before we go any further, today's video is brought to you by Beitong and their awesome Beitong Zeus 2 controller. They sent me out one of these controllers and I've been using it for all of Season 3 so far, and I must say this thing is absolutely awesome when it comes to playing Star Wars Hunters. Not only does it have the standard paddles on the back that most pro controllers do have, which are actually buttons on this one rather than paddles, but it also has 2 extra buttons at the top right near the left and right bumpers, and I'm genuinely surprised no other companies have ever really done this before, because it is the perfect spot to add some extra buttons, meaning this controller actually has 6 extra buttons in total. I've mapped those top ones to my ultimate so that I can sort of always get my ult off in a pinch without needing to take my thumb off the stick if I'm sort of aiming at enemies in the midst of a gunfight. Be sure to check out the Beitong Zeus 2 on Amazon through the link in the description. Big thank you to Beitong for sending me this controller. But with that being said, let's get back into the video. Now, the absolute best combo when it comes to playing as Pillbush is kind of making the most of 3 different abilities, or I guess 2 abilities and just her regular weapon. Something that I've found that works super well, especially when there are groups of enemies. So this works really well on objectives, for example, especially in like dynamic control, where often all the enemies are actually on that objective together. If you combine your Wisties by sort of throwing that on that objective, not only dealing a bit of damage, but slowing those enemies down, then you pop the overload ability to increase her rate of fire, and then essentially just use her grenades to spam the absolute hell out of those enemies. That right there is probably one of the best combinations in the entire game. It takes the enemies a pretty long time to get out of the range of those Wisties. They're also taking damage from the Wisties, and then at the same time you are just bombarding them with grenades with that added rate of fire too. So that combination right there, if you're ever in a pinch and you really need to get enemies off an objective or something like that, be sure to use that combo. You're almost guaranteed to get a few kills, or at least a few assists, if you and your teammates are closing in on an objective with 4 enemies sitting on it. Most of the time doing that, you can pretty much clear the objective, whether you're getting the kills or just literally pushing them off the objective. Now, speaking of objectives, Pillbush is also very good on the objectives in general, especially in power control or dynamic control, but not really in the same way as many others. If we take a look at, say, Groz or Slingshot, any of the tanks really that can sort of sit on an objective and just absolutely tank damage. She doesn't really work in that way. If you just jump on an objective, you're probably going to die fairly quick. And so she's not the type of hunter you really need to get on the objective and capture quite as much. Rather, she's more of like an objective clearer, if that makes sense, who's really good at getting enemies off the points from distance without needing to be on there. Even characters like J3 or Reeve, for example, they can be good on the objective, but obviously you need to get onto that objective and then deal damage, whereas Pillbush can just spam those grenades from a bit of distance. And so she is really, really good on those objectives, but it's not the same way as a lot of other hunters. And so don't think of it that way. Don't think, okay, I need to take this objective, so I'm going to jump on it. Instead, try and sort of sit at that sort of mid-range distance, bombard the objective to get enemies off it. And hopefully if your teammates are even somewhat competent, hopefully they will see that and then push on themselves, and you can pretty much hold the enemies at bay while they're doing that. Now, the last little tip I've got comes down to her Wisty ability, and this is that they are really, really good, but they're also good at different times depending on the different enemies that you're facing. Now, when it comes to the faster enemies, for example, like Slingshot or Scorer, it's often good to use the Wisties almost immediately when you're in a gunfight to kind of stop them from getting away. If a Slingshot is rolling up towards you and you put them down, it's going to slow him down quite a bit, at which point you can then bombard him with your grenades, and it sort of prevents him from quickly escaping. And obviously the same thing goes for Scorer and really just any of the faster hunters. That doesn't mean that situation works for everyone though, because for example, with the weaker enemies, let's take Reeve for example, sometimes it's best to actually sort of save those Wisties for when she's at low health, and as she's maybe trying to run away, then you can throw them down. Even if she has actually already run away from you, you can throw them at a distance, and that will then slow her down. And if she's low enough health, it'll almost guarantee a kill, because obviously she doesn't have much health in the first place. As for maybe the tanks who are a bit slower, you don't really need to use the Wisties to slow them down quite as much. So in that situation, maybe it's good to kind of keep them for a last resort, try and deal as much damage as you can. And maybe if they're getting really close to you, let's say it's Groz for example, and obviously you don't want Groz getting close to you because he's just going to beat the shit out of you with his 2 melee weapons. And so in that situation, if you've dealt a bit of damage, you can then maybe throw it down as a bit of a last resort, get a bit more distance and hold one of those tanks at bay while you sort of push back and then continuously spam them with grenades. And so that right there is sort of 3 different examples of 3 different ways you can use those Wisties. They don't always need to be used at the same time, and they are really good for fighting pretty much anyone in the game. But like I said, they are sort of best used at different times depending on the type of hunter. But that is it for some of the best tips and tricks when it comes to playing as Pillbush. Like I said, there will be a full Pillbush guide coming in season 4, as well as a lot of other hunters. For anyone who was around during the Battlefront days, these are going to be pretty similar to my hero guides from back then, so keep an eye out for those. I'm going to be going through every single hunter, and obviously as they get updates and stuff like that, patches, buffs or nerfs, I will be updating them along the way too. So keep your eyes out for those. But with that being said, thank you all very much for watching. You guys have a great day, and may the force be with you always.